So, welcome to lesson 5. Spiritual direction is an ancient practice, probably more familiar in the Catholic tradition, but recently it is becoming more and more accepted in evangelical traditions as well. In general, it seems like we are becoming more comfortable with contemplation as a way towards deeper life and doing that with someone else to form deeper community. Many are finding that the intentional spiritual conversations we have actually help us become more grounded in our crazy, high flying world. Thomas Merton said, he wrote in his book, contemplative life begins with a reintegration of our compartmentalized, colonized, traumatized, technologically enhanced, and workaholic being. Kind of sounds a little depressing, doesn't it? But it feels like that sometimes,
Yeah.
or maybe most of the time, it feels like that.
And David Benner, in his book, Sacred Companions, has a good definition. Spiritual direction is a prayer process in which a person seeking help in cultivating a deeper personal relationship with God meets with another person for prayer and conversation that is focused on increasing awareness of God in the midst of life experiences and facilitating surrender to God's will.
Hmm.
So this is different than what we talked about in coaching, where you have these open-ended questions and you don't know where it's going to go. There's some element of that in the spiritual direction, but it's got a direction to it. It's got a subject matter, and that is where can we see God in your life experience, or what you're struggling with, or what you're dealing with. Help the spiritual director is helping the other person to notice God, or to be aware of what God might be saying, and then actually maybe leading them in prayer to actually hearing God right in the moment there. So often the spiritual director is one who's like a mentor, has more experience in these matters, and is able to be kind of like a sounding board or a bit of a guide to help a person who's in the middle of handling all this, and they got all this on their mind and on their heart. The spiritual director can do it a little more objectively and just help them see God, and then
Right.
help the person surrender to God.
Hmm.
It's pretty cool. That's a pretty cool conversation.
Yeah. So I don't know if some of you have actually had kind of a formal appointment or a time with a spiritual director. If you have, then you kind of know how it works. But um, how does it work? Well, actually, the process is very simple, but profound.
Mhm.
It begins the same way as coaching and mentoring does in the way or in the aspect of that you ask good questions. So the spiritual director is their job isn't to necessarily tell you this is what this means and this is where you go and all that. They still approach it with asking good questions, but as Dan said, there's a point to the questions. And so a spiritual director or a spiritual friend in that kind of relationship might ask questions like this: how is your heart? And notice you can't say yes or no to that. You have to think about that and respond. Or what lies heavy on your heart today? And maybe there is nothing, but it starts that conversation. Here's another question. What are you most grateful for today? Or in the last week, what events, experiences, relationships have communicated to you a sense of God's presence
Good.
or God's absence? See, those are thought-provoking questions, and that's the key here. One that I have used a lot of times, and just I love the simplicity and yet the depth of it, is just what have you and God been talking about lately?
Mm.
Some may say, actually, God and I aren't talking at all. Well, Now you know where the conversation's going to go. Your response to these questions dictate where the conversation would go next. So the experience is very simple, and it needs to be in order to leave room for God to move and speak. And that's one of the most profound aspects to this that really caught me off guard the first time I was with a spiritual director, is that I realized that the person I was meeting with was trusting God to speak to me. They didn't have to give me all the answers. They
Mhm.
directed me by asking questions, and I had to listen to God for those answers. It's fascinating, actually. Both people must trust the Lord to work through the conversation, and that's how it becomes profound and very helpful.
And this must be a safe place,
Mm,
which means it's confidential. Whenever there's a spiritual direction conversation, you're talking about revealing your heart, some of the deepest things. And you got to be sure that this is not going to be, talked around. So there's got to be this confidential and trust. Without that, nothing happens.
mm,
So, this is not something you just want to say, oh, I'm going to be a spiritual director. I'm just going to do this. You probably want to get some good reading and even some training. There is actually spiritual direction training that
mhm,
you can be certified in, which really helps you get good at being this catalytic presence for God in person's life. So, why is spiritual direction helpful? Well, sometimes we just need someone walking with us so that we can become more aware of God. Just like the two that were on the road to Emmaus in the Gospels, they were just struggling with the whole crucifixion of Jesus and all that had been going on, and it took Jesus to come and walk with them, to open up the scriptures for their eyes to be opened. And sometimes we need to be that catalytic presence
mm,
who can help people see God. Sometimes we just need a time and a place to stop and be still and just become aware of God. And so when you've got an appointment to go meet with your spiritual director, it makes you stop and pause and think again and reflect spiritually when maybe the busyness of life, you haven't been doing that. And we need a safe place to wonder, to explore God's mysteries, and to be in a place where you're not going to be judged,
mm,
or there's no expectation of what you're going to do with this or be about this. There's this safe, accepting presence and conversation. And this really often becomes more important to us at midlife or second half of life, when we are becoming more aware of mystery and we're becoming a little more comfortable with expressing our soul's condition, when we realize that it takes this kind of openness for transformation to happen. So that's when we become a little more open to maybe letting someone else hear
mm.
what's going on in your heart, doing it in a prayerful atmosphere where the Holy Spirit can be talking to you in this process. So you remember from first encounter or course 1, we talked about first half and second half spirituality. Well, it seems that spiritual direction is something that people at midlife and second half often find very helpful. So if you've never experienced this, I'd like to encourage you to consider exploring that.
Mhm. Yeah, and that explains more, kind of more the formal part of it. You can actually find a spiritual director and make an appointment, and some people prefer that because it is a little bit at arm's length. Um, but in her book, um, Sacred Rhythms, Ruth Haley Barton writes about something she calls spiritual friendship. So she writes this: the purpose of journeying together in spiritual friendship is to listen to one another's desire for God, to nurture that desire in each other, and to support one another in seeking a way of life that is consistent with that desire.
Mm.
So She said, you can actually have a friendship and add this purpose or this journey to it if you both agree to that. So it's not meant to be a counseling session.
Yeah.
So you have to be careful to not let it slip into that, or even to make it a session catching up on the gossip, as friends will do. But this is a specific time with a friend to move forward spiritually together. It's a time to help each other be intentional and pay attention to God's movements in your lives. And you're both being intentional about that. There are some suggestions in your curriculum on how to make that journey valuable. So you can take a look at that, or go ahead and get a copy of that book.
Well, John, that's really helpful to make a differential between the more formal kind of spiritual direction and the informal. And
Hmm.
you can do informal spiritual friendship. In fact,
Yeah.
I have a friend that I've known for decades that every once in a while we'll get on the phone and we'll just naturally fall into this spiritual friendship, and we'll end up talking about what we're learning about God, or something that we're an idea about God that we're struggling with, or that we're really encouraged about or happy about. And I come away from those conversations just invigorated spiritually, and
Yep.
just so thankful to have someone like that I can talk to about these matters.
Right.
So find a spiritual friend and enjoy some of this in-depth conversation.
Yeah. And whatever you choose to do during that time, just make it genuine. Be intentional about it, so that expectations are clear with you. We're having a time to do this. Um, Engage the Lord together and bless each other with the investment
Yeah.
of your words and your time.
Yeah.
It can be, well, life-changing, really.
Yeah. So now the next video, we're going to get into ways that you can maximize your conversation, that
Mm.
it can really make a difference in people's lives. So get ready for some more in depth on this very important matter of conversation.
Mhm.